Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, your go-to source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We hope you tune in often for all things people management, organizational development and change, organizational leadership, and social impact related. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI podcast episode, I talk with Scott Mautz about best practices of the most successful middle managers. Scott Mautz, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, John. Looking forward to it. So be fun.
Yeah, I'm excited to have a conversation with you today. We've been preparing for this episode for a little while now, and you have a lot of great background and expertise and focus in your work around the role of middle managers, middle management, and how we can more successfully utilize middle managers within an organization to drive positive outcomes for their teams. And so today we're going to focus on best practices of the most successful middle managers and talk about things like leading up and leading down and across the organization, and really the important and critical role that quote unquote middle managers play within successful organizations. As we get started, I just wanted to share Scott's bio with everybody. Scott Mautz is a high-octane business inspirational speaking expert at igniting peak performance and deep employee engagement, motivation, and inspiration. He's a Procter & Gamble's veteran who successfully ran several of the company's largest multi-billion-dollar businesses, the multi-award-winning author of Make It Matter and Find the Fire, faculty at the Indiana University Kelley School of Business, and was previously a columnist at Inc.com with nearly 2 million monthly readers. He's a frequent national publication and podcast guest and can't wait to talk with us today about his new book coming out soon, May 18th, titled Leading from the Middle, a playbook for managers to influence up, down, and across the organization. The book is a love letter to the backbone of every organization, and yet those who are too often overlooked, the middle manager. I think that's a perfect framing for our episode today. It's great to learn more about you, and I'm excited to have this conversation. Before we jump on in, anything else that you would like to share with listeners by way of background, personal context, anything like that to shape the conversation?
Yeah, no worries at all. Just so your listeners and followers understand, John, I kind of pride myself on being a jack of all trades. I get a chance to teach executive education classes at Indiana University, and along with a number of books that I write, the blogs that I write, the articles that I write, and the keynotes that I give, I'm also a research nerd at heart. So what I talk about today comes from decades of experience, but also reams and reams of research that we've been focused on for the last 15 years, especially on middle managers, which I'll get to in a little bit. And folks might want to know, I'm also kind of a closet wannabe funny guy. I did stand-up comedy, but in my grad school days to earn beer money at night. So I like to have fun while I'm working hard. I believe in relaxed intensity. Work hard, play hard. Don't take yourself too seriously. So I'm just glad to be here today to talk about these forgotten heroes, the middle managers.
Yeah, and I think that is so true. That's a really great way to start the conversation, is we have this huge group of people that are so vital to the success of any organization, and they often get dumped on, and they get pulled, they get crushed from all sides, all the pressures that managers face. So let's start with some definitions. So first of all, what would you consider, what counts, or would you classify as middle managers within an organization?
Yeah, a middle manager, John, is anyone who has a boss and is a boss. And as part of their job has to lead up, down, and across the organization to influence and get their job done. A lot of folks say middle management. Okay, that's not me. I'm above. Okay, unless if you're the CEO, unless if you're a new hire, by definition, you're a middle manager. If you are a boss and have a boss, you're in this lovely, lovely group. And we're going to talk today about how to take massive pride in that and ignore the cultural stigma that gets placed on middle managers by, at least in the US, by shows like The Office and Michael Scott and cartoons like Dilbert that position middle managers as bumbling bureaucrats, which is far from the case.
Oh, sometimes those shows are funny and the comics are funny because there's some of it rings true, but they're stereotypes clearly. And I think of, for example, I'm in the HR space, and I often talk about Toby from The Office being the unfortunate poster child for HR. Like the most unfortunate kind of caricature of HR. Now, is there truth to it? Sure, there is some truth to it, but it's obviously not actually the way it is most of the time for most people. And the same thing with management and middle management. And one of the things I like to think about, because you are using a very inclusive definition of middle managers, like some people would say anyone at the executive level or above doesn't count as middle managers. But to your point, if you have a boss that you report to and you have people that report to you, you're in the middle and you do receive pressures from all sides, and you have to be able to manage up, down, and across to be effective in your role. And to that, you specifically use the word leading up, down, and across. That's right. Management, effective management is good lead. Like, you have to be a good leader to be an effective manager. Now, right. They're complementary skill sets. So you can be a pretty good manager without being a good leader, and you can be a good leader without being a good manager. And I've had plenty of those experiences in my life, and you probably have too. That's right. So what we're really shooting for is everyone within the organization who has some sort of supervisory and managerial responsibility, understanding and embracing their role, their potential as leaders and change makers within the organization. And if the organization, from the CEO on down, if they're going to develop, maintain, and sustain, a healthy culture and a strategic direction that helps the organization bring value to the market, that doesn't happen by a charismatic CEO laying out a strategy and like saying, here are our values and this is what we're going to do. While that's good, like, you need all of the different rungs, the different middle managers who are going to end up being the people that take it to the line employees who actually produce and create. And that's where the magic happens or doesn't happen, and where the organization's going to be successful or it's going to fail.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You don't need to be the leader to be a leader. And you're so right. The magic happens in the middle. It's pretty fascinating. We have all kinds of data on the importance of middle managers to an organization, John. And we now know that a high quality middle manager adds more productivity to the workforce. Just taking one middle manager and making them incrementally better is more productive to the workforce than adding a brand new member to a team. Middle managers in and of themselves, they account for almost 25% of incremental revenue in an organization. That's 3 times what people that are specifically in innovation roles produce. So yeah, I mean it from the heart when I say, my book, Leading from the Middle, it's a love letter to so many of us that are in this band of brothers and sisters called the middle manager.
Well, very, very good. I love that. And I love the idea of it being, a love letter, just recognizing the value of these individuals that do exert so much influence on the success, of the organization and the employee experience, the experience of the people at work. All of that is just so vital. So I guess we're already getting to the point of talking about why middle managers are so important to an organization. And we've kind of alluded to even why leading from the middle can be so challenging, because you are going up and down and across, and you have all these unique, constituents and stakeholders that you're trying to communicate in different ways to, right, to be effective. So let's dig into that a little bit more. And, how do you approach that? Especially if I'm a new manager, I'm new to a managerial role.
Yeah.
And now I find myself in the situation where, I think a lot of people think now they're in a management role, and as long as they can gain the respect and trust of their people, like on their team, they can be successful. Well, that's an important piece of it, but I think what you were probably going to tell us is that, that's only a slice of the pie. Like there's more to it than that.
There's a lot more to it than that, John. And we should probably start with, well, what is it about the middle management role that makes it so dang exhausting and so challenging? And we have to build beyond the world that we're in now, right? Everybody is exhausted managing remotely, right? And as I often like to say, people have to remember though that whether you manage remote or not, it's still leadership, and you call on a lot of the basic principles and tenets of that when you're leading remotely. But it's exhausting. And then on top of that, there's kind of a secret ingredient for why middle managers are so exhausted and so tired. And it's what psychologists call micro transitions, which means the middle manager has to wear 10 zillion hats. And the constant changing of hats throughout the day is now proven through neuroscience and psychology to be exhausting. For example, one moment, you have to take a deferential stance to your boss. The next moment, you got to be more authoritative with your employees. The next moment, you got to be more collaborative with your peers. Sometimes, John, that happens in the same meeting. And what we're now learning, brain research is showing, is that constant switching, that micro transitions, it is exhausting on top of all the other things that you have to worry about. So one of the things that, I talk about and I teach in the book is, okay, so if that's true, what can you do about it? Because if you're a middle manager, you can't say, okay, I've got the answer. I'm going to wear less hats. In your experience, John, would that work out well? I don't think so. Your job is still your job. So
I often wish that were the case. That would certainly simplify my life.
Right. Can you prioritize and take away some hats? For sure, but by nature of the beast, when you're in the middle, leading up, down, and across, you wear a lot of hats. So a fascinating thing occurred in our research, and I interviewed, surveyed, focus groups, spent time on the front lines with well over 3,000 successful middle managers for my book, Leading from the Middle. And we discovered something really interesting, John, that the most successful middle managers have found a way to take this exhausting reality of micro transitions and mentally reframe it. And they have found really inspirational reframes to think about their job in a whole new light. I'll share just a few reframes I heard that inspired me. I remember one woman from a company I won't name, it was based in Iowa. She was telling me about regarding all these hats. She just sees all these micro transitions. She doesn't see her job as segmented, that in truth, all the jobs are integrated into one job. These 100 jobs add up to one job that she is uniquely suited to do. And she takes pride in that. I heard another middle manager from Minnesota, from a company in Minnesota that won't be named, that said something that I wrote down, and the quote made the book. He said, look, Scott, when I'm feeling exhausted with all the constant changing in my day, I just remember my job is to think like an engineer and feel like an artist. And that was like a mic drop moment to me of like, wow, that makes a ton of sense. So as a middle manager, you have to be process oriented. You have to think analytically. You have to move things forward and use systems. But at the same time, you have to be empathetic. You have to understand that that's a unique role you play in the middle, and everybody wants an ear to lean on. That's what artists do. And I thought that the duality of that was really, really powerful. And then one last reframe I heard that really I thought was great was someone in a company in Indiana told me that they see themselves as the keeper of the long and the short-term flame, that they work on the business and in the business. And only people in the middle that lead up, down, and across have that privilege. So I talk a lot more about this in the book, but the first thing is you have to understand it's exhausting, but you can mentally reframe your role in the middle as something very special and unique that only you are suited to do. And it's very energizing. It's very energizing. Think about it that way.
excited to announce the publication of my new book from HCI Press, The Alchemy of Truly Remarkable Leadership: Ordinary, Everyday Actions that Produce Extraordinary Results. Consider how the nature of work has shifted over the past 50 years. With increased globalization, rapid technological advancement, and the shift in economic composition, the average job of today looks very different than the average job of 50 years ago. What will the jobs and organizations of tomorrow look like? Moreover, what does this all mean for organizational leaders? What are the core competencies and capabilities of organizations and their leadership that are prepared for continued disruption and geopolitical and socioeconomic shifts? Regardless of what the future holds, increasingly, leaders need to be socially minded, data-driven, decisive, champions of talent, and disruptors of the traditional notions of leadership, teams, organizations, and work. The Alchemy of Truly Remarkable Leadership will help you to explore your own leadership competencies and capabilities and consider ways to apply and implement them into your workplace and personal life.
I completely agree. I think it is so important for anyone who finds themselves in any of those kind of middle roles within an organization to don't allow yourself to fall into the trap of thinking, that you're kind of a less than kind of a leader. That's just not even remotely true. Everyone plays a really key, important role, and nobody is going to influence your team as much as you are. Nobody's going to leverage the resources of the organization for the benefit of your team as much as you are. Nobody's going to ensure stability and a successful and healthy culture as much as you are within your team. So within your world, within your sphere of influence, you are essential, and we have to remember that. So even if we're feeling pressured from all sides, we're feeling bogged down, that is normal, and pretty much that applies to almost anyone in any managerial, supervisory, or leadership role, unless you happen to be, the CEO at the top, and even they have to report to the board of directors. So, I mean, everyone's managing these relationships, and it's always challenging, and we need to give ourselves a break. We also need to recognize the value that we're adding through the roles that we play, and it's really key and important that we all learn to think of ourselves as change makers, as influencers, and as leaders, even if we, might be inclined to think, oh, we're just kind of a lowly supervisor, or, we're 4 rungs down, so we're just, kind of a low middle manager.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it really is true, John. I've talked to people that were one step away from being the CEO. And after my discussion with them, they realized that, look, okay, I'm still a middle manager. Okay, I'm upper middle, but the dynamic created by having a boss, being a boss, and leading across is not that different, even for the people that are, like you said, 4 or 5, 10 rungs down in the organization. The dynamics, that reality of having to manage 360 degrees is a really rich territory that hasn't been written about before and studied before to the extent that I have. That's why I'm so excited about this book, Leading from the Middle.
Very good, very good. So let's transition now and talk a little bit more about best practices of leading from the middle.
Yeah.
What in your research and how you framed it up in your book, what are some of those key essential best practices?
I'm going to share just a few, and an interesting side note, and I'll tell you why I'm sharing this. So I'm very blessed, John, that the book comes out May 18th, but it's shot straight to #1 on Amazon in Management Science, and the reason I'm sharing that's not a soft pedal promotion. The reason I'm sharing that is because the feedback that I'm getting already from people that I've shared advanced copies with is that it's one thing to understand the dynamics and the problems and the unique challenges of being a middle manager, which I get into a lot in Leading from the Middle. It's another thing to have a few crisp best practices that are very specific play-by-plays that you can follow. And that's what the book is packed with. And I'll share just a few of some of the key ones that I've heard back from early readers that they really find extra powerful. I'll share just a few. A general one that's pretty powerful is because you have to do so much in the middle, I found huge value in practicing the 50-50 rule, which means When you feel overwhelmed, inundated with so much to do, just stop, take a step back and say, okay, I need to spend 50% of my time on pragmatism, 50% of my time on possibilities. 50% of your time should be, okay, pragmatically, given everything that's going on, I'm going to force myself to be pragmatic. What must I focus on? What counts? What matters? What's going to move the ball forward? But at the same time, the other 50% is, what are the possibilities in this scenario of crazy things that are going on? And what research shows us is when we get over inundated, especially as middle managers, the first thing that goes are opportunities and possibilities. We're just trying to survive in the moment. We get rid of our to-do list. Other people give us their to-do list. Their urgent becomes our urgent. We get lost in this flurry of activity. And when we forget, okay, my job in the middle is to be the lighthouse and draw people towards opportunities and possibilities. And if you can keep that mindset, 50% on pragmatism, 50% on possibility, here's the beauty of that. 50 plus 50 equals 100, which means you spend 0% of your time spiraling down, worrying about how overwhelmed you are, how inundated you are, and spending your time on the wrong things. So we've seen the 50-50 rule really, really help people as a simple guide for crazy busy times for middle managers. Right?
And
Does that make sense? That's just one I wanted to touch on. Yeah,
absolutely. And can I just comment on that for a moment?
Yeah, please.
I think we've all seen, the leaders, managers within an organization who are just constantly running around like chickens with their heads cut off, kind of in this like putting out fires constantly mode, or how you described it, that downward spiral of just feeling overwhelmed and pressured, and sometimes that is the reality they're in, but a lot of times it really is a mindset thing. And we can approach it from a different paradigm and shift the way we deal with the pressures that we're facing. So your 50-50 rule, I think, is spot on. And I can think of, 10 people off the top of my head that I think, would immediately see their quality of life improve if they could adopt that approach.
I think so. We've seen it to be very powerful. I want to pack this episode with value for your listeners. So I'm going to share, John, if I can, maybe one of my best tips for leading up, for leading down the organization to your employees and leading across. You cool if that's where I go now? Yeah. All right. So let me do that. Leading up, maybe the most important thing, and just so we're clear, when I say leading up, of course, I'm talking about leading your boss or leading your boss's boss, leading their thinking, influencing them, right? Because we all want to do that. We don't just want to be order takers. Maybe the most important thing, and I get into this, I have a very specific 6-step process. I talk about leading from the middle, the managing up staircase. You take it one step at a time. But one of the most important things is you have to get crystal clear with your boss on what's expected. And I know that sounds obvious, but John, check this out. We did research with now we're up to almost 300 boss subordinate pairs. And we engage with them to find out and sense how well do they really understand what's expected of each other. In 80% of the case, 81% to be precise, 81% of the cases, there were material breaches of understanding of what was expected, both ways. So the odds are, and you being an HR probably know this, the odds are you think you understand what your boss wants from you. The odds are you really don't. So one very powerful tool you can do, and I think your followers can imagine this mentally. Imagine a simple chart. I call it the good to great chart, where in one column, you list out, let's use leadership as a metric that's important. I'll just pick leadership. You ask your boss, okay, boss, what does good leadership look like to you? Let's talk about the definition. And you agree to a definition, you write it down. Got it. What does great leadership look like to you? And then you talk that and you write it down, and then you have them side by side. And what happens, John, is we're not used to thinking about things that way. It forces the leader, your boss, to articulate what he or she is really looking for. And it stops the imprecise language. It stops that. It says, oh, okay, this is good. This is great. If you want to get to great, here's the next benefit it produces. You're now, oh, I see what you mean, boss, by great. You've written it down. It's now very clear. Okay, I need help getting to great. I think I need training. I want training. I'm making this up on public speaking and strategic thinking and analysis. Okay, now you have an individualized learning plan. as well. So we have found doing the good to great grid and forcing that discussion around the language of good versus the language of great performance, on whatever performance metric you want, is incredibly powerful for getting aligned on expectations. And that's the first step. Is that right? Does that make sense? Is that consistent with what you've learned in the HR field, John?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Very quickly on leading down, I'm going to go with the biggest question that I get by far. And maybe you probably see this in the HR space as well, John. When people say, okay, I'm a new manager now of others. First thing they ask is, how do I give feedback? So maybe that's the most important gift you can give your employee to manage down, is to get good at it. And the rules are very simple. You got to be specific, right? My grandpa used to say, white bread ain't nutritious. And it applies to feedback. If it's bland, generic feedback, no, that's not going to work. You got to think of feedback as whole grain, nutritious, packed with nutrition to help people grow. It has to be sincere, the feedback. If it comes from the heart, it sticks in the mind. It has to be calibrating, meaning you have to provide context to it. So, John, let's say I'm giving you feedback, and I would either say, okay, John, with this podcast at your stage in life, the feedback I'm giving you, you should feel good about it. It's right, there's nothing wrong with what you need to improve upon. It's right where you need to be in this life cycle of you developing the podcast. Or I need to say, like, wow, John, I'm telling you this about your podcast, and you really got to pull it together because you're going to fall behind, right? You got to be very clear and calibrating on what that feedback means to the individual. By the way, because if you don't, they'll spiral right to the worst case scenario with it if you don't clarify for that. A couple of things, you got to be, when it comes to feedback, you have to be proportionate. People generally do more good things than bad. And our research shows that in general, for every one piece of corrective feedback, you want to give 5 pieces of positive feedback. That's the way the human brain is wired. You have to be timely. After the fact feedback is matter of fact feedback, and you have to be tailored. Right? You have to find out how the person likes to receive feedback. And in my experience in life, John, there's 3 kinds of people on the earth. The first kind like to receive feedback direct. Give me the bad stuff, the corrective stuff, right up front, or I can't listen to the rest of it. That's me, right? Like, until you tell me that, I can't concentrate and enjoy the good stuff you're going to tell me. The second kind are people that want the compliment sandwich. Give me something really nice. Tell me something nice about what I'm doing. Then give me the bad stuff. Then tell me the nice stuff again, right? Then the third kind are the people who say they want the first type, but they really want the second kind. They want the compliments. So how do you find out? You ask. Very powerful thoughts for managing down in an organization, right? Does that make sense, John?
Yeah, absolutely.
What you found to be true.
Yeah, absolutely. And you made a comment a moment ago that I think is worth noting. If you don't get specific with the feedback that you're providing, and you're not clear in how you communicate, people do tend to either spiral down and kind of assume the worst, or, and this is a smaller subset of people, but there are people who just, they think they're amazing. And if you don't get specific, they're going to continue to think they're amazing, and that everything they do is, like stardust and unicorns and rainbows. So we're doing everyone a disservice when we're not getting clear and specific and doing everything that you just described. That's absolutely essential to making sure that that we have meaningful feedback. And to your point, just ask people how they prefer to be communicated with.
That's
Everyone's different, and we can't assume that all men want it this way, all women want it this way. Whatever, we can slice and dice and stereotype people. Just ask them how they prefer to have that communicated. And most of the time that will then allow you to be more successful.
That's right. They'll be stunned that you asked, probably, John, right? It's probably the case. Because I promised your listeners something across, up, down, and across. That's what middle managers do. I'll touch very quickly on a best tip for managing across. And what I'm talking about here, especially in the middle, right? Sometimes, John, we have to influence people that don't report to us. We have no authoritative right over them. But when you're in the middle, you still have to, influence with your personality, not your position power. And so in the book, I talk about something very powerful that I call the golden rule of influence. So we'll do a very quick test, John. John, I want you to think of somebody in your life that had a lot of influence over you, but you didn't report to them. Okay, so it could be at work for sure. It could be in life. They were really influential, but they just, and let's stay in the work arena for now, but you didn't report to them. The odds are they were so influential because of the golden rule of influence. They cared they listened, they gave you something, or they taught you something. Are any of those four true of that person that you have in mind?
Yeah,
if not all four.
Yeah, absolutely. All four.
And that's what we find. So people wonder, how can I influence people that don't report to me? If you're caring about them, if you're listening, if you're giving, if you're teaching, just like the other people in your life that have had that impact on you because of those behaviors, I promise you, you'll be able to influence across the organization as well. The golden rule of influence.
Well, I love that. Scott, it has been a real pleasure talking with you. I really appreciate all the insights you shared and the sneak peek into your book. I really encourage listeners to check that out. Before we close today, I did want to give you one last chance to share with listeners how they can get connected with you, where they can find your book, and anything else you would like to share, and just final comments on the topic for today.
You bet. You can find my book, Leading from the Middle, by Scott Mautz, M-A-U-T-Z, just at Amazon by Googling that. Or you can go to my website, scottmautz.com, SCOTTMAUTZ.com. And John, I put together a giveaway for your listeners today. If they go to scottmautz.com/free tools, no spaces in between that, free tools, scottmautz.com/free tools. I have a 30-page companion workbook for free set up that goes along with Leading from the Middle for them. Some people really like to fill in the blank, do multiple questions. It helps them to learn content better. It accompanies the book Leading from the Middle. And they get free access to my complete leadership and self-leadership toolkit, which is jammed with free tools for them to lead more powerfully from the middle. So that's scottmautz.com/free tools. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today, John. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Scott. It has been a pleasure. I've enjoyed the conversation as well. And I encourage listeners to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Scott can do for you, check out his book. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week.
We are excited about the launch of HCI's new magazine, Human Capital Leadership. Human Capital Leadership is a free, interactive e-magazine designed to help individuals, leaders, and organizations find innovative approaches to maximize their human capital potential. We will be publishing issues quarterly in August, November, February, and May. Check out the first issue and let us know what you think. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week. Check out our new weekly LinkedIn newsletter, Alchemizing Human Capital, exploring industry trends via original research and interviews with executives and thought leaders from across the globe. We look forward to having you join us.